Hi there, Jerry Detweiler again here from NAV, and we're going to talk about the new EIDL grants, what they are and how to qualify. And I hope this will be helpful to many of you who would really like to take advantage of this program. So let's cover what are the emergency EIDL grants, who's eligible, what about taxes, how do you apply, and what other help is available for your small business, whether or not you qualify for this. There's a lot in the stimulus bill that may benefit your small business. It is important to understand that I'm not an attorney and I'm not your financial advisor. So this information is changing. We're reading from the current legislation in the stimulus bill. But if it's anything like last time, after the Congress passed the first legislation, the CARES Act, the SBA came in with updates, clarifications, and even some changes to how the program works. So we'll do our best to keep you apprised of all these changes. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so we can let you know when there are updates to the program. So let's go review real quickly, what are EIDL grants? Some of you got one and you kind of know what it is, and some of you didn't and you're wondering what it is. So let's just recap real quickly. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program is a program that has been around for years under the Sba Disaster Loan Program. The Sba Disaster Loans are pretty much the only SBA loan where the SBA actually makes the loan. All other SBA loans, they firm that out to lenders who make the loans, including PPP, which you may have also heard of. So with the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, in March, when the coronavirus crisis blew up, the SBA determined that any business anywhere in the country or the U.S. territories who was impacted by the COVID-19 crisis and otherwise qualified could apply for one of these loans. And the CARES Act added something new. It added a $10,000 grant. So the way it works is you apply for your EIDL loan, you check a box at the end saying you want to be considered for the grant, and then if you qualified, they would give you the grant. Now, the grant, of course, does not have to be repaid. The loan does have to be repaid. There's no forgiveness for EIDL loans in the new legislation or the CARES Act. It's not a forgivable loan like PPP. Now, what happened after the CARES Act was passed is that the SBA and the Treasury Department decided to limit the $10,000 grant to $1,000 per employee. Some people got $1,000. Some people got the full $10,000 because they had at least 10 employees. Some people got none. They got denied an Eidl and they didn't even get the grant. And that doesn't really make sense for those who were denied based on credit because it was a grant that doesn't have to be repaid. So no clue why that particular requirement happened. So what we have is, and then we had a second scenario where in August, they ran out of money for the EIDL grants. So there were still people who kept applying or whose applications were in process and they got the loan or the offer for a loan, but they did not get the grant. And that's not necessarily what they wanted. So let's talk about what this legislation does. It tries to fix at least some of those problems, and it does a pretty good job, but there are some holes still. All right, so in the original CARES Act, to apply for an EIDL loan or grant, because remember, you applied for the loan, you checked a box, and then they give you the grant if you were eligible. You have to be a small business, ESOP, cooperative, or tribal business with 500 or fewer employees. You have to meet the Sba Size Standards, which is typical for SBA loans, and that's easily found. It's in our article that's on the NAV blog, as well as if you just search sba.gov size standards. It does include sole proprietors, self-employed individuals, and independent contractors. So we heard from a lot of Uber drivers, for example, at NAV, who were able to take advantage of this program. Some landlords who's had problems because either their tenants couldn't pay or maybe they have an Airbnb and it was shut down due to regulations in their area. They also may have qualified for these as well. The business has to have been in business by January 31st, 2020. And everything I can see seems to indicate that's still the case. I haven't seen a change for 2021, but if we do, we'll update that with you. And then they must have been impacted by COVID-19. So there were a lot of videos and talk about how this was free money from the government, but there was also fraud that the SBA is now investigating. So it really was meant for a business that was impacted by COVID-19 and needed this money to help survive. So now the new stimulus bill has a new section for new emergency Eidl grants, and the requirements are a little more restrictive than the original CARES Act. In this new legislation, I want you to understand, I'm going to explain this in a moment, but I want you to understand that if you already applied for an EIDL, whether or not you got the grant, you may still qualify for this. So we'll explain how that works in just a moment. But in this new round, the business cannot have more than 300 employees. It has to be located in a low-income community, and it must have suffered an economic loss greater than 30%. So let's go over what the legislation says about those requirements. Low-income community. I am still looking for an easy, clickable resource where you can put in your zip code and see if your business is in a low-income community. I have not found it yet, but I'm convinced I will, so stay tuned with that. But in the meantime, it's defined similar to IRS regulations, and it's basically for businesses located in areas where the median income level is lower than it is statewide, and there are some additional restrictions that you'll see in the legislation. Again, we should have some sort of resource before too long that will help you identify whether your business is located in a low-income community. This other requirement that I mentioned, 30% economic loss, we need to define that as well. And here's exactly how the legislation defines it. It says the gross receipts of the covered entity declined during an 8-week period between March 2nd, 2020 and December 17th, 2021, relative to a comparable 8-week period immediately preceding March 2nd, 2020, or during 2019. So let's just break this down real quick. They're looking at an 8-week period after the COVID crisis hit, and they're telling you need to compare it to the same period before so that you can see whether that 30% that your business lost and gross receipts, that's the money coming into your business, not including loans like PPP, whether your business declined, for pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. And the SBA will come up with a formula for seasonal businesses. Now, how do you prove it? We aren't sure yet. The SBA is allowed to request documentation. But here's the tip I'm going to give you. If you think at all that you want to apply for this EIDL grant or that you may be eligible for it, please spend the next week getting your bookkeeping up to date, because you need the information, your information about your business, the financial information about your business. You need that up to date so that you can provide whatever required information that the SBA is going to request to document this 30% economic loss. And we saw so many businesses in the first round of EIDL and PPP who had trouble qualifying because their books were not up to date and they didn't have the financial information they needed to accurately apply for those loans. How much can you get? So with this, with the emergency EIDL grant, you can get up to $10,000 minus any previous EIDL grant. Okay, so if you already got $1,000, then you may get up to $9,000, 10,000 minus 1,000. Now, I am not aware of any provision that allows you to get a second EIDL. So if you got a grant, so if you've got the full $10,000 grant, I do not believe, at least it's my understanding reading the legislation, that you will qualify for a second $10,000 grant. However, you may qualify for this up to $10,000 grant even if you were turned down for EIDL the first time, or if funding ran out before you got it. So let me say that again. Even if you were turned down for EIDL the first time, let's say they turned you down based on credit, they didn't give you a grant, they didn't give you a loan, but you meet the qualifications that we've just outlined, you may be eligible for the full $10,000 in this round. So keep that in mind. Now, there's also some great news on taxes. Until this stimulus bill was signed, we had nothing that indicated that these grants were not tax deductible. In fact, normally small business grants are taxable. So now we know the EIDL grant is not taxable. In addition, if you spend that money on expenses that can otherwise be deducted for your business, they're still deductible. So that's an added benefit. Finally, it will not be subtracted from PPP for forgiveness purposes, and that's retroactive. So if you got a PPP loan, you already got it forgiven, and they subtracted out your EIDL grant, guess what? You're going to be made whole on that. So that's really good news for those borrowers. We don't know exactly how yet. The SBA has to come out with the guidance on how that will happen, but you will be made whole on that. Now, I want you to understand that EIDL is not just free money for your business. I alluded to that before, but it's still so important because I can't tell you how many people I corresponded with in our comments who said things like, well, I'm a Uber driver. Can I buy a new car? No, these loans are not meant to be for business expansion. They're not meant to be for relocation. There are certain ways you cannot use the loan. They're meant to cover expenses that the business must pay in order to continue the business through the disaster. So these were some ways that were specified by the SBA that you can use the Eidl grant. So if you have not used your Eidl grant money for acceptable purposes and documented that, please do that because it's very important. You could be audited by the SBA and you want to be able to document that you used it for acceptable expenses. So how do you apply? That's the big question. Well, like any SBA disaster loan or grant, you will apply at sba.gov. That's the SBA's website. You will not apply at a lender. So if you applied through a bank last time, you didn't get EIDL, you got PPP because EIDL only goes through the SBA. Now, the legislation states that the SBA gives first priority to those who didn't get the full $10,000. So those who got some, but didn't get all of it and qualified for the full $10,000. Priority 2 is those where funding was exhausted. So they never got anything because the funding had run out. So presumably that first priority, the people who applied first, the second priority, those who applied later, and the funding had run out. In the legislation, it says the SBA has 21 days to review and either approve or explain why they decline it. Last time we saw some applicants waiting for as long as 30, 45 days. I think there are some people who still don't know what happened with their SBA Eidl application. So they have set a firm deadline on this. All right, now I want to give you a couple quick tips on other assistance that you may want to look into that is included in the stimulus bill. If you got Eidl, if you are going to get the Eidl grant, you still may qualify for a PPP loan. That's a Paycheck Protection Program loan. And there's a new round of PPP loans, including a new second round for people who already got a PPP loan and still need help with their business. And these are completely forgivable if you spend them on the right expenses, primarily payroll. And that could include paying yourself. So payroll can be you as the business owner as well. So make sure that you check out PPP. There's no restriction on applying for both PPP and Eidl. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, you no longer subtract Eidl from PPP for forgiveness purposes. So you can get your entire PPP forgiven. Your entire Eidl grant doesn't have to be repaid. That could be a big help for some businesses. So you can sign up for a free NAV account, nav.com, and we will alert you when these loans are available. And we'll also put a link down below to sign up for a free NAV account. And again, we'll alert you as soon as they're available. We'll also be updating our NAV customers in their newsletter about when the EIDL opens up for this new round of EIDL grants. There's a bunch of other provisions I won't spend a lot of time on here. I just want to bring them to your attention so that if it catches your eye, you're going to at least try to apply for it. Pandemic unemployment has been extended through the middle of March, and that may include independent contractors and the self-employed. SBA loan relief. So if you have an SBA loan, say a micro loan or a 7A loan, 504 loan, the SBA is going to pick up your payments up to $9,000 per payment for the next 3 to 8 months depending on which bucket you fall in. And that can include some new loans as well. There's funding for community development financial institutions and minority development institutions that will help low-income and minority borrowers. There's a big grant program for live venues, but those who choose to participate in that program, so that could be a movie theater, a theater, other cultural institutions, museums, etc., those who participate in that cannot also get a PPP loan under the new program. If you're a landlord, you may benefit from a rental assistance program that's going to help pay your tenant's rent for a time. And then if you're a childcare business, you may be eligible for part of the $10 billion allocated for assistance. So there's a lot in this program. So what can you do right now while you're waiting? Well, I already told you, get your books up to date. This is so crucial. So if you're behind on your accounting for your business, please get that up to date. And then consider signing up for a free NAV account. It's free, it won't affect your credit scores, and we'll notify you when the new PPP loans are available, and we'll also update in our newsletter when the EIDL grants open up and provide updated information as well. You can also connect with us, visit our blog, or connect with on our social media accounts. We also have a Facebook group that's very active talking about these loan programs. That's the overview. I hope you found this helpful. Please feel free to put your comments down below, your questions, and we will do our best to answer them as best we can and keep you informed on this program and how it can benefit your small business. Thank you so much for joining me today.